Yeah, thank you very much, Franz. And Linda, I also really appreciate your comments. I think they provide a very nice segue into the remarks that I'm going to be making. And also, it's just an honor to be up here on this panel with all these very experienced and learned minds. So to complement the rest of this panel, my remarks are going to be focused on the role of public policy in shaping agricultural, and then by extension, health and nutritional outcomes. To help keep me within the allotted time, I do have a few notes with me that I'm going to reference, and I hope you don't mind. So one issue that this conference has clearly demonstrated over the past few days is the complexity of actually linking agriculture, health, and nutrition, not conceptually, but operationally. Overcoming organizational or ministerial silos is difficult to say the least, but this is the role of public policy as I see it. Now, yesterday it was mentioned, actually by somebody in this room, that development has a short memory, and the same can be said of policymakers. We need to learn from our mistakes and successes to understand what works and what doesn't work. In other sessions this week, we've also learned about the negative impacts of unintended consequences, whether that be in investing in economically valuable big fish versus nutritionally rich little fish, focusing on food safety at the soil level while losing sight of it of food safety and storage, or any number of other examples. These unintended consequences should also be viewed as public policy challenges and are a key component of what I'm going to be saying. So in this context, I think it's beneficial by focusing on the simple relationship between policy and outcome. Now, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, agricultural policies can be designed to have any number of desired outcomes. And governments typically adopt agricultural policies to enable some combination of food security or low food prices at home or access or benefit to farmers. It might be to maximize the export value of crops or to more efficiently manage or optimize resource and environmental constraints. And oftentimes these objectives are competing and require prioritization based on local needs, constraints, and market conditions. So in establishing agricultural policies, it's obviously important to consider your starting point and your stakeholders, those who should benefit from a given policy. These two areas vary greatly based on the country and circumstance. For instance, as we learned earlier today in the ministerial session, in Rwanda, current policies are focused first and foremost on enabling food security, as it really should be. This is a very important issue. But my remarks here aren't really focused on what we can learn from Rwanda, but rather what we can learn from the United States. And in the United States, during the Nixon administration in the 1970s, early 1970s, a conscious decision was made to pursue a cheap food policy to benefit American consumers. Now, previously, the USDA had helped maintain farm incomes and provide for farmers by limiting production. In other words, some farmers were paid not to farm. With less supply on the market, prices remained naturally higher. However, under President Nixon's agriculture secretary, this policy was reversed. Now farmers would be subsidized, given direct payments, price supports to encourage more production. The entire goal was to grow more food and to pay less for it in the supermarket. Now, this mandate played out as a get big or get out strategy, and it led in agriculture to productivity gains from increased consolidation and specialization, and farmers responded to the incentives by growing more food. With increased output, prices fell. By pursuing cheap food, U.S. farm policies objectively achieved their desired outcome. As Linda had mentioned, food prices have fallen, and in America, we now spend under 10% of income on food. That's less than anywhere else in the world, but in parallel, U.S. farm policy also contributed to a number of new and unexpected consequences. While the percent that we've spent on food has fallen by more than half, the amount of income we've spent on healthcare has more than tripled, from around 5% in 1960 to around 16% today. Now, much of this increase is tied to dietary disease. In the U.S., like many other OECD countries and rich countries, approximately 2/3 of the country is overweight or obese, and this number is rising. On that note, I do want to make a point. A lot has been said at this conference about the role of overnourishment. I fundamentally have an issue with this term to describe the situation. I see it less as overnourishment, and in the U.S. I think it's more a case of being overfed but undernourished, because when you look at the products that are contributing to these dietary diseases, it's not really the nutritious ones. Also, another way to understand this in the American context is that a lot of people rightly remark that putting on weight is just a factor of being a developed country and getting richer. and it holds across pretty much all areas of the globe. That's true, but it's interesting to look at when Americans move abroad, they universally lose weight, while foreigners immigrate to the United States, they basically universally gain weight. So looking at the dietary diseases that are plaguing the country right now, it's amazing to recognize that approximately the same amount of money is spent treating obesity, diabetes, and hypertension as is spent on national defense, some $500 billion annually. It's not millions, billions. Now, also as Linda mentioned, I do want to be careful in noting that there's not a one-to-one relationship between farm policies and health outcomes, but there is a fairly clear connection between what we grow, what we eat, and the impact this has on our nutrition and health. Obviously, dietary disease is an output of diet, and to reference Wendell Berry, eating is an agricultural act. Now, additional challenges have also resulted in food safety. Food recalls cost the economy between 60 and 70 billion annually in the United States, as only about 1% of food is traceable from farm to fork. If and when a foodborne illness outbreak occurs, we don't know the source. You end up seeing massive food recalls because we can't trace that one bag of, spinach that was infected with E. coli down to the specific grocery store or distribution plant or processing facility or farm. So we end up recalling all spinach off the market, as occurred a couple of years ago. Now, there are other challenges as well and consequences as well regarding energy, environment, economic, and trade. But given the time constraints here, I just want to focus on the points already made, although I'm happy to take questions in the other areas afterwards. So, applying the lessons that we've learned in the United States to the developing world, care must really be taken to ensure that agricultural policies align with national objectives to avoid unintended consequences. A common theme that you're going to hear from this panel is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and agricultural policies can and should be tied with national health, nutritional, environmental, economic, developmental, and political goals. However, an obvious major challenge exists in identifying what these goals are and should be. And on the subject of unintended consequences, a remark that I think a lot of the economists in the room will appreciate is really another way to look at unintended consequences is that they're really just unplanned for trade-offs. This really increases the importance of getting policies right at the outset and understanding what we're choosing between so that we end up recognizing trade-offs rather than consequences. Now, it's no surprise that many countries struggle with finding the right balance in designing and implementing policies that are tied to their specific agricultural, nutritional, health, or other developmental goals. On a lot of engagements I've recently been involved with, and I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences, in many parts of the world, such as much of Africa, agricultural output remains a legacy of colonialization. In these areas, a huge opportunity exists in modernizing agricultural systems to better benefit farmers, consumers, and the entire value chain. And effective public policy is really one of the best ways to drive the changes needed. It's not enough in and of itself, but it's also a required step in establishing the agenda that moves the system forward. So, kind of in conclusion, I want to reference a remark made by President Harry Truman back in 1946, when he mentioned that no nation is healthier or no nation is more prosperous than their farmers or more healthy than their children. Remembering these words, I think it's really imperative that we consider the role of public policy and also clearly identify the goals and trade-offs of public policy to support healthy children and prosperous farmers, because both are hurting really no matter where you look in the world, and certainly in the United States. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention, and I welcome all of your comments and feedback after my colleagues finish with their remarks.
Thank you, Patrick.